By any standards, St Marylebone Parish Church is an astonishing building. With its Corinthian columns and portico, its imposing angel top tower, it stands boldly on Marylebone Road at the heart of one of the most affluent areas of central London. Throughout the parish church's history, strong literary associations have been built up, with the playwright Richard Brinsley Sheridan marrying here, Lord Byron, Wilkie Collins and the son of Charles Dickens all having been baptised here. And of course, the parish church is also one of the key buildings associated with the lives of Robert and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, providing the point of fundamental change in their relationship when, on the 12th of September 1846, they arrived here to make their marriage vows and marry in a private ceremony conducted by the Reverend Thomas Woods Goldhawk. But what did St Marylebone and the surrounding area mean to them? How did it come to have such a pivotal role in their lives? And how does it relate to their story?
This depiction of St Marylebone in the early 19th century, when the Brownings knew it, hangs on the wall above my desk in the parish church's crypt. The original can be found in the amazing array of 19th century art now housed in Tate Britain, just a few miles away. The artist was Benjamin Robert Haydon. He himself was baptised and married here in the parish church. He entitled his work Punch, or May Day. Mary Russell Mitford introduced Haydon to Elizabeth's sister Arabella, and he and Elizabeth were to correspond for several years. Indeed, Haydon's famous painting, 1842, of Wordsworth on Helvellyn was to inspire Elizabeth to write her sonnet on a portrait of Wordsworth by B.R. Haydon, which follows the focus of Haydon's painting in its celebration of Wordsworth as a poet-priest, and which Elizabeth included in her groundbreaking 1844 volume, Poems.
Wordsworth upon Helvellyn. Let the cloud ebb audibly along the mountain wind, then break against the rock, and show behind the lowland valleys, floating up to crowd the sense with beauty. He with forehead bowed and humble-lidded eyes, as one inclined before the sovereign thought of his own mind, and very meek with inspirations proud, takes here his rightful place as poet-priest by the high altar, singing prayer and prayer to the higher heavens. A noble vision free our Haydon's hand has flung out from the mist. No portrait this with academic air. This is the poet and his poetry.
Haydon's Punch, or May Day, is a rather different painting though, since it focuses on a busy urban scene. People of all classes rub along together in this picture and appear to fill the canvas to bursting with colour and activity. On the left-hand side stands a Punch and Judy show, where the puppets act out the usual violent marital encounters for which Punch and Judy is infamous. The show is watched by a whole array of figures: middle-class ladies and gentlemen, a soldier, a farmer whose pocket is being picked, and a small boy who appears to be working as a chimney sweep. A woman is slumped in the bottom left-hand corner, while a carriage tries to negotiate the crowd on the right-hand side. The scene is incredibly vibrant, and it becomes hard for the viewer to know where to rest their eye amongst it all. And then, in the upper right-hand corner of the canvas, is a depiction of the top half of St Marylebone Church, with its towers and columns, the parish church where Haydon himself was married in October 1821. What Punch or May Day offers then is an image of urban street life on Marylebone Road at the end of the 1820s. Its diversity, its vitality, and the idea of the parish church overlooking it all as a kind of moral guardian for the area. When Haydon painted this scene, St Marylebone Parish Church was still a relatively new building, having only been consecrated in February 1817, but it replaced the previous parish church sited just around the corner, principally because of a need to accommodate the growing population of the area. In many ways then, St Marylebone Parish Church is clearly associated with the modern world and the rapid expansion of the burgeoning metropolis.
The Barrett family moved to St Marylebone in 1835 following the sale of the family home, Hope End, near Ledbury, after a short period spent in Sidmouth. They first lived at 74 Gloucester Place, before moving to the now famous address 50 Wimpole Street, where Elizabeth was to stay there for 8 years. The move to St Marylebone and to Wimpole Street in particular was incredibly positive for Elizabeth in many ways. At first she was unsure about London. She complained of headaches from the endless noise of the carriages rattling past outside, for example. But she soon found sanctuary in a smallish room on the 3rd floor at the back of the house, which overlooked the high, star-raking chimneys of the city. One of the dominant views of Elizabeth at Wimpole Street is of her constantly being sickly and fragile, lying upon a chaise longue with a scented handkerchief held over her brow, whilst Flush, her faithful dog, nestled beneath her voluminous petticoats and skirts, a view which undoubtedly has a strong basis in reality. Elizabeth's illness, although often undefined, was centred upon her lungs and necessitated a dependence on opium, her welcome elixir, as she called it. Yet at the same time she was able to use her private room as a space in which to pursue her literary ambitions.
From her early teens onwards, Elizabeth had an incredible drive, an absolute commitment to poetry as work, as she termed it in the preface to the 1844 poems, and confidence that being a poet was what she was meant to do. In a semi-autobiographical essay written in the 1840s, for example, she reflected that her younger self had wanted to be seen as the feminine of Homer, or she quips, a little taller than Homer, if anything. This is the young woman who was the early devotee of Mary Wollstonecraft, whose 1792 work, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, she repeatedly devoured, and who doggedly taught herself Greek and Latin, French, German, Spanish and Italian. Elizabeth was also politically engaged from an early age, following her father and brother in a commitment to Whig politics, with its concern for the legal, civil and religious rights of the individual. Indeed, by the time the Barrett family moved to London, Elizabeth had already established herself as a challenging poet who had produced works dealing with issues such as the abuses of press ganging, Latin American politics, styles of political leadership, and, following her great hero Lord Byron, the Greek War of Independence. At Wimpole Street, she dedicated herself to developing her position as commentator upon some of the most pressing concerns of the day: industrialisation, slavery, the problems of capitalism, women's rights, as well as writing some of the most beautiful and challenging religious poetry of the century. Indeed, by the time she and Robert met, Elizabeth was an internationally acclaimed writer, and a few years later she would be a contender for the post of Poet Laureate on the death of Wordsworth in 1850.
In contrast to Elizabeth, the young Robert Browning was still emerging as a poet, although increasingly recognised as a fascinating new voice with works like Sordello and Pippa Passes, and increasingly working to develop his experimental poetics in volumes like The Dramatic Lyrics of 1842. Growing up in Camberwell in southeast London, Robert was, like Elizabeth, primarily self-educated at home and supported in his choice of vocation by his family. It was his early attempts at writing for the stage, writings which were, by all accounts, fairly disastrous, which led to his dramatic monologues, which would become so crucial to the development of poetry across the 19th century. The Brownings' courtship began when Robert was shown a highly complimentary reference to his poetry in Elizabeth's 1844 poem, Lady Geraldine's Courtship. Celebrating his work as part of the new modern literature of the age, the poem's speaker talks of reading from Browning some pomegranate, which, if cut deep down the middle, shows a heart within blood tinctured of a veined humanity. The reference here being to Robert's series Bells and Pomegranates. As a result, Robert wrote that initial letter which 19 months later would find him and Elizabeth standing together before the altar, surmounted by Benjamin West's painting of the Holy Family and Mr. Goldhawk, one of the assistant curates at St. Marylebone Parish Church. I love your verses with all my heart, dear Miss Barrett, opens Robert's first correspondence with Elizabeth in January 1845, and then a few sentences later comes the unflinching assertion that I do, as I say, love these books with all my heart, and I love you too. This declaration initiated a correspondence which would consist of 573 letters and which would also lead to 92 visits by Robert to Elizabeth's room at Wimpole Street, all of them conducted clandestinely so that the developing relationship would be kept secret from Elizabeth's controlling father.
The face of all the world is changed, I think, since first I heard the footsteps of thy soul move still, oh still, beside me, as they stole betwixt me and the dreadful outer brink of obvious death, where I, who thought to sink, was caught up into love and taught the whole of life in a new rhythm. The cup of dole God gave for baptism I am fain to drink, and praise its sweetness sweet with thee anear. The names of country, heaven, are changed away, For where thou art or shalt be, there or here, and this lute and song, loved yesterday, the singing angels know, are only dear because thy name moves right in what they say.
On 12th of September, 1846, Robert and Elizabeth were married at St Marylebone Parish Church, in a ceremony attended only by their two witnesses, Elizabeth's maid, Elizabeth Wilson, and Robert's cousin, James Silverthorne. Just a short distance from Wimpole Street, the parish church witnessed one of the most momentous events in the history of 19th century literature. A week would pass between the marriage service and the couple leaving London, a week in which Elizabeth was constantly nervous that what they had done would be discovered. The bells of St Marylebone striking the quarter hours served to increase her anxiety and sense of guilt while she sat in the drawing room at Wimpole Street. She was even concerned that some might go through the parish church's registers, find her and Robert's signatures from the service, and inform the newspapers. At the same time, and in the months which followed, the Brownings reflected in letters on what the ceremony at St Marylebone had meant to them. Writing at 1 p.m. the very day they were married, Robert, in his typical exuberance, told Elizabeth that she had given him the highest, completest proof of love that ever one human being gave another. I am all gratitude, all pride that my life has been so crowned by you. In return, the next day Elizabeth wrote to Robert that during the ceremony, I thought that of many, many women who have stood where I stood, and to the same end, not one of them all perhaps, not one perhaps, since that building was a church, has had reasons strong as mine for an absolute trust and devotion towards the man she married. Not one.
How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, both feeling out of sight for the ends of being and ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death.
To meet the
3 weeks later, now in Roanne in the Loire, Elizabeth was more forthcoming with details of that morning, when she told Arabella and Henrietta that after the ceremony she and Robert parted as we met at the door of Marylebone Church. He kissed me at the communion table, and not a word passed after. I look like death, he has said since. Indeed, so great was the emotional strain for Elizabeth that she very nearly passed out on the way to the parish church, and, supported by Wilson, she had to stop off to buy smelling salts from the chemist. What the Brownings went on to find and create in their marriage was by all accounts nothing short of remarkable. A relationship between two devoted partners who developed together both personally and professionally. As Elizabeth wrote to Mary Russell Mitford before leaving London, we go to live a quiet, simple, rational life, to do work, to write poems and read books, and try to live not in vain and not for vanities.
The marriage was not without its problems. Repeatedly in contemporary accounts, there are references to the Brownings' disagreements about Italian politics, spiritualism, and how they should raise their son Pen, who'd been born in 1849. But there seems to have been few issues beyond these. Their mutual respect and understanding of the other person's needs was to last throughout the 15 years of their marriage until Elizabeth's death in 1861. A period which was also remarkably creative for them both. Robert's Christmas Eve and Easter Day was published in 1850, and his major collection, Men and Women, in 1855, whilst Elizabeth produced her major works on Italian unification, Casa Guidi Windows, and Poems Before Congress in 1860. Moreover, between these overtly political volumes, Elizabeth published perhaps the work for which she is rightly most recognised, Aurora Leigh, the poem where the female protagonist, the poet Aurora, is able to achieve independence, a successful literary career, a meaningful relationship, and a home in Italy, just as Elizabeth was able to do. For both Robert and Elizabeth, their marriage would have them caught up in love and experiencing life in a new rhythm.
Visions unto visions.
Robert and Elizabeth enjoyed 15 years of happy married life together. As the years passed, their love for each other grew stronger. Elizabeth died on the 29th of June 1861 and was buried in Florence, leaving Robert a widower for 28 years. It is said that following his return to England and until his death in 1889, Robert revisited the parish church, the place of his marriage, every year on his wedding anniversary, bending to kiss the threshold over which they first stepped into the world as man and wife.
In 1931, another innovative writer associated with London, Virginia Woolf, gave a sense of what the Brownings were remembered for in the interwar period. In an essay on Aurora Leigh, which was published the same year as Rudolph Bessier's The Barretts of Wimpole Street was becoming popular, Woolf wrote, "By one of those ironies of fashion that might have amused the Brownings themselves, it seems likely that they are now far better known in the flesh than they have ever been in the spirit. Passionate lovers in curls and side whiskers, oppressed, defiant, eloping. In this guise, thousands of people must know and love the Brownings who have never read a line of their poetry." Lady Geraldine's courtship is glanced at perhaps by two professors in American universities once a year, but we all know how Miss Barrett lay on her sofa, how she escaped from the dark house in Wimpole Street one September morning, how she met health and happiness, freedom and Robert Browning in the church round the corner. That church, of course, is St Marylebone, the building which was so central in the Brownings' lives as they negotiated their relationship into a supportive and nurturing partnership, their life in a new rhythm on so many levels. In 1846, when they were married, the parish church was still only 30 years old, a response in stone to the new modern growing urbanisation of the city. It seems fitting then that these two poets, who were themselves so committed to the modern in terms of embracing new modern ideas, developing new modern poetic forms, and engaging with new modern subject matters, were to marry here. Today, Elizabeth's and Robert's work is more widely read and studied than it was in Woolf's day, and St Marylebone Parish Church remains central to preserving their memory, both physically with the altar table and painting before which the couple made their vows, and in the Browning Room with its bas-reliefs of the two poets and memorial window. It took real commitment, organisation and daring to do what Elizabeth and Robert did that September morning back in 1846. St Marylebone Parish Church was the start of their new lives together as poets and lovers.
174 years on from their marriage, St Marylebone Parish Church still stands alongside the busy road captured by Haydn and known so well by Robert and Elizabeth. Gone is the Punch and Judy show, and anyone standing where the watching crowd stood then would today be mown down by the incessant traffic. The parish church has embarked on an ambitious £10 million project of much needed restoration and repair to keep it at the beating heart of this community. A really important part of the St Marylebone Changing Lives project is telling the story of the many women and men who have been connected with this place, not least Robert and Elizabeth. As part of the works, the Browning Room, in which I'm standing now, created just after the Second World War, will be completely refurbished and brought up to contemporary standards of access, and will be provided with excellent audio-visual equipment, enabling us not only to share Robert and Elizabeth's story, but to keep their memory alive. It would be great if you could help us by supporting our project and donating to St Marylebone Changing Lives. Thank you. Thank you so much for being part of this year's online commemoration of Robert and Elizabeth. Hopefully, next year, the 175th anniversary of their marriage here, you will be able to join us in person.
To Little